and welcome to Context for Kids. We're backtracking a bit, back into backgrounds of the New Testament. This will be part 11. Now we've talked about a lot of different issues, but mostly what we talked about when we talked about New Testament backgrounds was the Maccabean Revolt. And so now we're going to pick up where we left off there because it ties into our next topic in Matthew chapter 2, verse 1, King Herod. But we can't talk about King Herod, an Idumean king of the Jews, without explaining how such a thing happened, that a man who wasn't even a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob became king of the Jews in the first place. So, this is the start of a 6-week, actually, teaching where we're going to be talking about the rulers of Israel during the time of the Roman occupation. But first we're going to go into the sons of the very, very brave and very, very righteous men who launched the Maccabean Revolt. So these teachings are going to be a solid PG/PG-13 because we're going to be talking about I think it's intra when it's in the family violence. We're going to be talking about people who do terrible things to their family members in the name of power. We're going to talk about things like assassinations, imprisonment and starvation, murder, all that kind of stuff, treachery and intrigue, all in the name of power. So make sure that you get your parents to watch this with you, or get their permission depending on how old you are, and I'll be right back with who were the Hasmonean priest kings. Okay, so hi, Miss Tyler. Welcome to Context for Kids, as usual. And this week we're going to be talking about the Hasmonean priest kings. And it was a really strange situation. And it's very much misrepresented one in a lot of teachings. So I have spent the last month really digging into this again. It's very complex. I want you to know right now you will not be tested on this information. It's going to be confusing. It's going to seem like it's going in circles. But I don't want you to think that you're missing anything. What I want to talk to you about, what I want to convey to you is how crazy insane the political situation was during the 1st century BCE, before the Common Era, and the 1st century CE of the Common Era. So we're going to be talking about the 100 years before the birth of Yeshua, Jesus, going up to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, and that's going to be over the next 6 weeks. We're going to be talking about, this week, about the Hasmonean priest kings. Next week we're going to be talking about Herod the Great. The next week we're going to be talking about Herod's sons, who are the ones that we see popping up over and over again in the scriptures. Because there were quite a few different sons, and a lot of them are just called Herod. You have to know which one they're talking about. Then we're going to be talking about the procurators from Rome, governors, people like Coponius and Pontius Pilate. People who were not Jews, but who were governors sent by Rome. Felix is another one. Then we're going to be talking very briefly about the Caesars. Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, Caligula, Nero, Tiberius Caesar. The Caesars that were over everything. And then we're going to talk in the 6th week about something called imperial cult worship, because that's going to show up over and over again in different stories. But if you aren't familiar with it, the context is going to go right over your head. They really did worship dead emperors, after a sense. And that really affected the lives of especially the Gentiles who were coming to faith in the Messiah. So, without further ado, let's get on to the actual lesson. So, what happened after Hannukah? You know, we talked about the Hannukah where they finally got the temple back and cleansed after the devastation wrought on the Jews by Antiochus Epiphanes. Remember, he had taken the temple, he had sacrificed a pig on the altar, he had defiled the temple of God. And he was forbidding circumcision, he was forbidding the Jews to be able to live according to the word of God. Well, the priests just couldn't put up with that, and the family of Mattathias, excuse me, a priest from the town of Modin, he and his 5 sons, Judas, Eleazar, Simon, John, and Jonathan. It's weird how John and Jonathan sound the same in English, but in Hebrew it was actually Johanan and Jonathan. So they weren't actually, they only sound alike in English. So he didn't really give his kids the same name. And they waged war on the Seleucids. That was a Greek ruling family over that region. And they finally got the temple back. They finally got it cleansed. And Hanukkah is the celebration of the rededication and re-honoring of God after the horrible things that were done to dishonor him. Excuse me, allergies. I just got to put up with that today because they're not going away. So finally they got it back. But the bad news, okay, so the good was the religion of the Jews was never messed with by the Seleucid Greeks again after they kicked them out of the temple. But the bad news was the wars were not over. Okay, so the 5 brothers here. Shortly after the first Hanukkah in 165 BCE, after the death of the father, Mattathias, Antiochus Epiphanes died, and Demetrius, who was very evil enemy, sent another army into Jerusalem and set up a man named Alcimus as both high priest and governor. Now, Judah Maccabee kept on fighting, but was killed in the Battle of Elasa. But the temple wasn't redefiled, so. Jonathan, another brother, became the new commander in place of Judah. And he had many victories against the Seleucids. Then there was peace under him in Israel for 5 years. So that was important. Now he was serving as high priest. They don't know if Judah Maccabee served as high priest or not. It's debatable. There's evidence pointing one way and evidence pointing the other way, so I just don't teach what he was. He was the leader of the army. Okay, Jonathan, though, was high priest and kind of a governor over the region. Now, after years of peace came terrible battles, betrayals, and even assassinations, leaving only Simon alive of the 5 original brothers. By the time that 142 BCE came up. And then something really unfortunate happened, something that's very understandable. The Jews at this point, they talk about the word Hellenized. But the entire world was Hellenized. Hellenization was a way of thinking, it was a way of living. Hellenized simply meant, it could simply mean that you were just living under Greek rule. And it affected everything. Now the people had an election, and they elected Simon as both high priest and prince. Now I want you to notice he was not made king. He was made prince. And what's the difference between prince and king? Well, a king has absolute authority in every way. But God said that only, well, we'll get to that in a minute. The prince is a hereditary ruler. Okay, they made him a hereditary ruler, which means he would be prince, his son would take over after him, his son's sons would take over after him until, and they made this very clear, a prophet shall come. Now, what was wrong with this? What was right with this and what was wrong with this? Well, what was right with this was they needed a ruler until a prophet should come. See, only a prophet can anoint a man to be the Davidic king. Like Samuel anointed both Saul, and then when Saul really betrayed God and proved to be an unworthy king, Samuel anointed David, the shepherd. And then through Solomon, his line was set in stone. And God said that there would never be any legitimate kings over Israel except for if they were sons of David. Well, these were sons of Levi. So they could only be called prince, okay? Which in Hebrew is nasi. And nasi actually means quite a number of different things. It can be the prince, or it can be the head of the Sanhedrin Council, the Supreme Court of the Jews. Okay, so they made him high priest and prince until a prophet should come to tell them who the Davidic king would be. Well, that's not so bad, right? Well, problem is it was actually the job of the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court, to appoint a high priest after the death of the old high priest. Second, there had always in the past been a clear separation between the high priesthood and, well, I said kingship here because it's going to be a kingship later, but between that and the rulers. You know, even though he was only a prince, it was a hereditary title. Now, since the exile, the Jews had been ruled by governors under foreign powers. Nehemiah, there's a book of the Bible called Nehemiah. He was a Jew who came back during one of the waves from Babylon. And he was made governor over the region. They had different governors. Sometimes those governors were Jews. Sometimes those governors were not Jews. Okay? But they were never hereditary. They always served at the pleasure of whoever the king or the emperor was over the powers that was ruling over them, whether that be Cyrus or Darius or the Seleucids or the Ptolemies or whoever was over them. Okay? It wasn't hereditary. It wasn't autonomous. Autonomous means self-ruling. It means the Jews had their own person that was their ruler, and they weren't under any other country. That's what autonomous means. Okay. Now, this was almost, when they elected Simon hereditary high priest and prince, it was 25 years after the first Hannukah, and the Maccabeans, you know, the 5 sons of Matthias, they were still very much loved and revered, and they were good men. And they had done what they did, not because they wanted power, but because they were offended that the Jews could not live by God's laws and the temple was being defiled. They were religious zealots in the best way. So, but when they took leadership, they blurred the lines between the priesthood and the ruling line by not appointing separate governors. See, they were priests, and we don't know if they were from the line of Zadok or not. And they very well may have been from the line of Zadok, because in the historical writings, no one ever complained about them being high priest, only about them being governor and high priest, with one exception that I may not, well, it had nothing to do with their genetics. Let's just put it that way. So the Jews had not been self-ruled in 445 years. So they were coming into this not knowing what to do. They had no idea how to rule without an emperor over them that they were paying taxes to and that they were beholden to, and they had to toe the line. Anyway, Simon was assassinated by Ptolemy. Now the Ptolemies were the Greeks that ruled Egypt and all of the Greek holdings in Africa and certain other areas. So Simon was assassinated by Ptolemy along with his 2 oldest sons in 135 BCE. The rest of his descendants, unfortunately, were not the man that he was. So let's look at the family tree of Matthias really quick. So we got Matthias. He is the one who started the Maccabean Revolt. He is the old priest who refused to set a bad example for everyone else. And his sons were John, Simon, Judas, go. Eleazar and Jonathan. I've got the studio light shining in from my point of view. Okay, so Simon and Mattathias and Judah, these are Simon's sons here, were murdered on the same day as he was by Ptolemy in a very, very treacherous way. Okay, that left one son, John Hyrcanus. Okay, so whenever I have an X through it, it means murdered. Right now I have a green circle around John Hyrcanus because he wasn't serving as king, so it wasn't as bad as the guys who are going to be circled in blue later. And when you see a green X, it's going to mean they died of natural causes. We're going to have too many red X's here. So, John Hyrcanus, son of Shimon Maccabee, he was the first generation after the people who had fought the Maccabean Revolt. Now, he was high priest and ethnarch, prince, over Israel from 134 to 104 BCE. Now, he was a vassal to the Seleucids. And as a matter of fact, in the beginning of his reign, he had a lot of trouble getting his butt kicked by the Seleucids. You know, the Greeks who had ruled the area before they kicked them out. As I said, his father, brothers, and actually his mother was murdered by the Seleucids at the beginning of his reign. His father and brothers were murdered by the Ptolemies, that was the Greek family who ruled Egypt, and his mother was killed by the Seleucids. Just really awful. But during his reign, he actually added, he was actually able to weaken the Seleucids, and the Seleucids had infighting going on while they were having their own internal problems. John Hyrcanus was able to conquer Transjordan areas. Now, Transjordan means the area on the other side of the Jordan River, and I'm going to put up a map now, and you will see right there. He also conquered Samaria, Galilee, and Idumea. So we're going to show the areas right there. Remember, Idumea was the south of Judea. Galilee was to the north, and so Samaria was between Judea and Galilee. If you did not watch my 2 geography lessons that I've given so far, please do. Very important. Now, he forced the Idumeans to convert to Judaism, required them to be circumcised, and required them to live by the laws of the Jews. This they were absolutely willing to do. And this is where King Herod's family enters into the story, because John Hyrcanus was very good friends with King Herod's grandfather. He's sometimes called Antipater, and he's sometimes called Antipas. So, you know, choose one. But John Hyrcanus made this Antipater or Antipas, the strategos, governor of Idumea, and he was a brilliant general. And he was always very, very loyal to the Hasmoneans. This is this royal family that's coming to be. So John Hyrcanus called himself high priest and chief of the congregation. That's what it said on the coins minted during his tenure. Okay? So, John Hyrcanus. Now, John dies. John's going to die of natural causes here because, you know, I crossed him out in green. Here we got murdered, murdered, murdered. And now we're going to get to Aristobulus. Now, Aristobulus is going to be married to a woman named Alexandra Salome. And he has 3 brothers, Alexander JANNAEUS, Antigonus, and Absalom. And yes, I drew a red X, so we all know that Antigonus is already doomed. But who's going to do him in? Well, it's not a very pretty story. Okay, so Aristobulus the First. He reigned from 104 to 103 BCE, and that was 1 year too many. Now, he was the first to declare himself an actual king over the lands that his father, John Hyrcanus, had conquered. Now, here's a terrible thing, okay? John Hyrcanus, his father, Well, he had said, in his will, he said he wanted the kingship, the rulership of the civil government, or not kingship because it wasn't, but he wanted his wife appointed the ruler over the civil government. She must have been a pretty wise woman, either that or he didn't think much of his sons. And he declared his son Aristobulus to be high priest after him. So he was splitting up the government functions. Methinks someone didn't trust Aristobulus to do both. So his wife was supposed to be ruler, and his son was supposed to be high priest. Okay, so what did he do? Well, first he jailed his mom and brother, and he actually allowed her to starve in prison. He jailed her because if she was in jail, then she couldn't be the ruler. He could be the ruler. He had only one brother he trusted, and it wasn't Alexander JANNAEUS. So we're going to go back one here. So it wasn't Alexander JANNAEUS, didn't trust him, left him in prison. He trusted Antigonus, who we see is marked out with a red X. But he allowed some people to kind of poison his mind against his brother, even though his brother was very loyal to him. And he sent an order that his guards were only to ever kill Antigonus if he showed up armed in front of him. And at the same time, he sent a messenger saying, "Don't ever appear before me armed," or well, somebody bribed the messenger. And the messenger said, "Oh, your brother wants you to come before him in your new armor and weapons." Do I even need to tell you how that turned out? He had his brother slaughtered. Okay, so what a guy, what a guy, what a heck of a guy, what a heck of a really great guy. No, it's messed up. These are Jews. These are people who are supposed to be not only loving your neighbor, but loving your family, man. How about loving your mom? So he died of a horrible, painful illness, and as I said, good riddance. Guy was messed up. Okay, so now, who's king after him? Well, there's some people in jail. Oh, I told you that Aristobulus I was married to a woman named Alexandra Salome. So now Alexandra Salome is the widow of a priest, of the high priest. Okay, and so here we go. His brother we don't know what happened to Absalom, by the way. I have no idea. No one seems to know. Doesn't bode well, does it? Maybe he was just really a harmless guy. They were not really notable enough to write anything about, which in this family is very positive. Okay, so now we have Alexander JANNAEUS, and he actually ruled for a long time, from 103 to 76 BCE. So he was the brother, of course, of Aristobulus I. And he, like his brother, took on the title of high priest. He took on the jobs and titles of high priest and king. And he married the person who let him out of prison, Alexandra Salome, his brother's widow. She let the family out of jail. She was great, and she immediately offered him her hand in marriage. Now, this was probably a levirate marriage because she and Aristobulus didn't have any children. So this was actually completely legal by the laws of the Bible, that he should take her as his wife, as he didn't actually, he'd been in jail and he wasn't really, it's not a great place to meet women. Just future advice there. Don't meet women in jail. Don't meet men in jail either. Don't go to jail. Hopefully your family isn't the kind of family who would send you to jail like this. Alright, so Alexander JANNAEUS marries Alexandra Salome, and they have two messed up sons, but we're not talking about them yet. So, Alexander JANNAEUS was a horrible, horrible, evil man. He betrayed an alliance with Ptolemy, and there were a whole bunch of Ptolemies, and we're not gonna, he was just generally treacherous with everyone. He was not a guy. During his reign, was the famous civil war between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And we're going to talk more about the Pharisees and Sadducees later, but for right now I'm just going to tell you that the Sadducees were very Hellenized. They were very worldly. They wanted worldly power. That was their focus. Whereas the Pharisees were very pious, religious people. They wanted everyone to follow God's laws. They wanted the temple to be pristine and undefiled. They wanted to honor God. They went a little too far sometimes, and we'll talk about that. But given the choice between them and the Sadducees, I would take them 7 days a week and twice on Sunday. And so there was a civil war that lasted for 6 years where it was just a mess. And like I said, he was pro, well, I didn't say it. It would help if I put up the PowerPoint. Okay, so he was pro-Sadducee. All right? He liked the worldly rule. And the Pharisees, there's a rabbinic legend that the Pharisees opposed him as high priest because his mother, and this was true, had actually been held prisoner by the Seleucids. And that, well, they were making very unkind insinuations about potentially the honor of his mother after that. Okay, so they said, be our king, but give up the high priesthood, because we're really, really not sure about your mom. And of course his mother had been murdered. Wasn't smart, if that's what happened. But it's very, very likely that because the Pharisees were very, very serious about God's laws, that they were telling him that he didn't have the right to have both offices because it was unprecedented. And they were right. They were absolutely right. So he became pro-Sadducee because the Sadducees were into power. And they were going to let him do whatever he wanted as long as he supported them. Okay, so some of the things that happened during Alexander JANNAEUS' reign, there were a ton of them. We're going to talk about the water pouring fiasco. There is this beautiful ceremony during the Feast of Sukkot called the water pouring ceremony, and it's done every single day of the Feast of Sukkot, which you can find out about in Leviticus 23. Well, instead of pouring the water and the wine where they should have gone, he poured it on his foot. Not cool. Because the Sadducees really didn't approve of this ceremony. Okay? But he poured it on his foot. So all these people, okay? So this is actually really funny. So the Bible commands that you take goodly branches and so they translate it as palm branches, and something called an etrog. Etrog is like a big honkin' lemon, okay? And so they had them, and you wave them, and I'll do a little video when that time comes because I get one to show you. But they chucked their etrogs at him like they were stoning him. Right there. It says, here he's doing this ceremony, and he pours it on his foot, and all of a sudden he starts getting pelted with these big honkin' thick lemons, okay? And he didn't take kindly to that, and he had 600 people slaughtered in the temple courtyard. In the temple courtyard, he's shedding blood. Great high priest, eh? What a guy. After that, in order to punish the people, he built barricades to keep people from offering sacrifices except for the priest. Well, at the feast time, that's horrible. Everyone's commanded to bring a Hagigah, a festival offering, to honor God and to celebrate with a meal. That was bad. Bad. Yeah. I mean, really, he was saying that, well, the priests have a relationship with God, but none of you can. Okay? You can't obey the laws. You can't, tell me how he's different than Antiochus Epiphanes. Well, as we get more and more in the generations, they aren't. Become evil people. So there was a civil war. that I mentioned before, where the Seleucids, the Greeks, were actually recruited to come in and fight against Alexander JANNAEUS and his very wicked reign. They brought in the Seleucids, they did, and he fought, and he almost had Alexander JANNAEUS defeated, but then the Pharisees are going, wait, we can't do this, we can't side against one of our own, so a lot of them went over to Alexander JANNAEUS. They kicked the Seleucids back out of the country. And Alexander JANNAEUS, while he was having a feast with his concubines, so not only did he have a wife, but he had concubines, he had other women. While he was feasting with them and partying, he had 800 Pharisees crucified. And he had each one of them, he had their wife and their children brought before him while they're on the cross and had them killed. So he was slaughtering men, women, and children whose only real crime was they wanted a bad king out and they wanted God to be honored. Very awful. Very awful. Finally, Alexander JANNAEUS died. Okay, so we've got Alexander JANNAEUS is dead. Now we have something really good happened, and this is going to sound crazy. The only good monarch out of the Hasmoneans was not a Hasmonean at all. When Alexander JANNAEUS died, he named his wife, who was in her 60s, to be the next ruler of the Jews. And she was wonderful. Boy, you read historical accounts from everywhere, and there is nothing but praises heaped upon her. She was a very, very wise and righteous ruler. So now we have Salome Alexandra. She was the only Hasmonean queen. She wasn't Hasmonean. Like I said, she married into that mess. Probably why she was, decent. She had been the wife of Aristobulus I and Alexander JANNAEUS, as I said. And she had two sons, HYRCANUS and Aristobulus. She appointed her son HYRCANUS II as the high priest, because obviously as a woman she couldn't do both, right? So she was the ruler and her son was the high priest, and she actually ruled for 11 years, very wisely. Now, unlike her husband, who was pro-Sadducee, she was pro-Pharisee. And she was just universally praised for the peace that she brought. She reestablished the Sanhedrin, so now there's a Supreme Court operating. That's good. That means the king does not have absolute powers anymore. And she was beloved as a righteous monarch. And she also died of natural causes. Now we have the messed up times. We have 3 more kings to go through. HYRCANUS II, Aristobulus II, and Antigonus Matthias. This is why Herod became king, because of these 3 guys. When Alexandra Salome died, she had her son HYRCANUS, who was already the high priest. He took over as king. But after a 3-month reign, he was deposed by his brother. You see, HYRCANUS was fine as high priest. He was kind of lazy and really not that. He wasn't a warrior. He really wasn't. And so his brother kind of put a lot of pressure on him, a lot of violent pressure on him. And after 3 months, in exchange for a lot of money, he gave the rulership over to his brother Aristobulus, who was awful, terrible. Now Aristobulus was pro-Sadducee, not pro-Pharisee like his mom. He was pro-Sadducee like his father. And he entered into a civil war with his brother, because HYRCANUS II, even though he'd agreed to live on revenues from, whatever, HYRCANUS was very easily flattered and manipulated. So, by Antipater, Herod's father, and the son of Antipas Antipater, who was friends with John Hyrcanus. They convinced him because the Romans felt it would be a lot easier to deal with a very, very weak king than a very, very warlike king. So the Idumeans and the Romans wanted Hyrcanus as king. You know, the high priest who was lazy. They didn't want Aristobulus, who was warlike. So, Aristobulus II was finally defeated by Pompey. And, you know, I could take a day and talk about this whole war with Pompey, but I'm not going to. It's just too complicated. In the end, after a 3-year reign, Aristobulus II, the brother of John Hyrcanus, was defeated by Pompey, and he was exiled to Rome with his family, and Hyrcanus II was set up again as high priest, and he held that post for many, many years. Okay, so Aristobulus wasn't killed. Aristobulus wasn't killed. He was exiled with his family, which was a big mistake, come to find out. Okay, so during the Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, because there's an Antigonus too coming up here. During the Hyrcanus-Aristobulus civil wars going on, the Romans were brought in. Specifically, Pompey the Great. Now, Pompey the Great is very, very famous. Also, Mark Antony was brought in. Mark Antony, you've heard of Antony and Cleopatra? Yeah, that Cleopatra. They were all around at the same time. Now, Pompey the Great was one of 3 men who were in charge of Rome. Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, and Crassus. And so this was a big gun on Hyrcanus' side, because he was friends with Antipater, Herod's dad, and he was friends with John Hyrcanus, Hyrcanus II's dad, also Aristobulus' dad. But Rome wanted the Hasmoneans gone. That's what it really came down to. So they put Hyrcanus back in as high priest, but only make him ethnarch. They only make him a ruler, and they made it very difficult for him to rule so that they would really be the power behind the non-existent throne anymore. Because Hyrcanus too was now involved with Pompey the Great, he also became involved in the Roman Civil War between Julius Caesar and Pompey, which resulted in Pompey's death in 48 BCE. Now, okay, so we're going back here. Hyrcanus, who was friend of Pompey the Great, this is just crazy. He was made high priest again. He served as high priest for 23 years, from 63 to 40 BCE. We're getting closer to the time of Messiah, aren't we? Yeah. So he was made high priest again after Pompey took Jerusalem and the Temple Mount and booted Aristobulus off to Rome. So, like I said, he was only high priest. He was stripped of the kingship. He was made governor of Judea and Galilee. But there was a whole bunch of land in between that he wasn't given control of. Made it very, very impossible to rule over. Okay, so I told you about the Roman Civil War that happened during this time. Pompey the Great was destroyed by Julius Caesar. Well, what happens? Hyrcanus II, the high priest and governor, and Antipater, Herod's father, well, they were friends with Pompey. What do? Well, you switch sides. After Pompey was dead, they went over to Julius Caesar and started fighting for him. And they were greatly rewarded for doing that because he realized that they were loyal guys. One, they were loyal to Rome. And two, they knew they could see the writing on the wall, and he wanted smart guys with him. So John Hyrcanus, after the death of Pompey the Great, and Antipater pledged loyalty to Julius Caesar. Antipater was given Roman citizenship and control of just about the entire region of Israel. Hyrcanus was confirmed as high priest, and his land was that was given to him by Pompey was taken away from him, given to Antipater. And Jews were given great privileges in the empire. They were allowed to do things other people weren't. They were allowed to meet. Because in the Roman Empire, you couldn't meet. You couldn't gather together because the Roman Empire was always afraid that people were plotting against them. Jews were exempt from those non-meeting rules. They were also given free, they were also given the freedom to practice the religion of their fathers without interference. And that was almost always honored. All right. So I told you they should have killed Aristobulus, right? It's terrible Bible teachers saying they should have killed someone, but really. From their point of view, they should have. Aristobulus escaped Rome with his son Antigonus almost immediately in 57 BCE. I mean, this is just like 6 years after he was deposed. Okay? Launched a failed rebellion. Aristobulus was taken again back to Rome, and Antigonus was released. I don't know why they did that. Now, Aristobulus and Alexander were actually released from prison in 49 BCE by Julius Caesar when he wanted them to fight against Pompey. So this was during that Roman Civil War. His other son Antigonus, the one that they just let go, you know, back after the failed rebellion, well, he conspired with the Parthians, which was an empire size-wise about the same size as the Roman Empire, only to the east. And it included Iraq and Iran and all the stuff that the Babylonians and the Medes and the Persians and everything, all of their lands. Okay, so Antigonus I conspired with the Persians and conquers Israel along with the Parthians, and he's made king and high priest. But he's going to be the last one. So, and we will see next week how he is the last one. This is a really long teaching. How did Herod become king? Well, Antipater, his father, remember he was given control of all of Israel. He gave Galilee to his son Herod, remember Galilee's in North Israel, and Judea to his son Phasael. When the rebellion of Antigonus sprung up, Antipater, the father of Herod, and Herod's brother Phasael were killed. They were actually murdered. HYRCANUS, the high priest, was maimed, so he couldn't be high priest ever again. And Herod had to run for his life to Rome. And next week we are going to see what happens. Oh my goodness. Okay, so that was a really, really long lesson, and I hope you got the gist of it. I know you're probably confused. I'm confused. It's a heck of a lot of information, but what I really wanted to relay to you was what a horrible mess our Messiah was born into. And that the Jews had a chance to live their lives, and I mean, they were in control of their own lives, finally, after 445 years. And when given absolute power, their leaders were no better than the pagans. And so next week we're going to see that God is going to turn them back over to the pagans. It's just really important to understand. And next week we're going to talk about how Herod became king. And you're going to see that it's going to be even more complex. Our Messiah was born into a crazy world. And that crazy world affects how we read the Bible. It's not important that we understand everything, but it is important that we understand that the things that happened didn't happen in a vacuum. There sometimes are no easy answers. And we just have to realize that sometimes the world's messed up and people are doing the best that they can. And a lot of the stories in the Bible, we see people doing the best they can in horrible circumstances. So, in Yeshua's, Jesus' life, it's no different. So we're not going to do a discipleship moment this week, but hope to see you next week for Herod the Great. You take care. I love you. I'm praying for you, and I hope that you have a wonderful week studying the scriptures together as a family. Bye.